In the shadows of the UK, where fog hangs heavy and secrets linger, evil finds fertile ground. I'm Ellie, and this is Ellie on Evil, a descent into the abyss of the human soul. I don't just recount crimes, I dissect the anatomy of malice, peeling back the layers of depravity that shroud the UK's most infamous killers and criminals. Each story is a chilling exploration of the darkness that dwells within, a stark reminder of the fragility of innocence. Prepare yourself for a journey into the heart of darkness, where the line between sanity and madness blurs and the true cost of evil is laid bare. Welcome to Ellie on Evil, where we confront the demons that haunt our nightmares. Tonight, in the pilot episode of my newest series, we begin with a story that shook an entire nation. A story about innocence stolen, a community shattered, and the terrifying truth that monsters don't always look like monsters. Tonight, we are talking about the man responsible for one of the most haunting child murders in modern British history, Mark Bridger, and the little girl whose name the world refuses to forget, April Jones. On an ordinary October evening in 2012, the quiet Welsh town of Machynlleth was settling into its usual calm. Children were finishing dinner, families were watching television, and parents had assumed that their children were safe in the streets they had known their entire lives. 5-year-old April Jones was doing something completely ordinary for a child in a close-knit community. She was playing outside with friends near her home. At around 7 p.m, witnesses reported seeing April willingly getting into a car. That moment would become the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Within minutes, her family realised she had vanished. What followed was one of the largest missing person searches in the history of the United Kingdom. Police officers, volunteers, and neighbours flooded the small town. Hundreds of people combed through forests, through fields, through riverbanks, and through hillsides. The entire community mobilised. At first, hope was strong, but that hope would not last very long. Within hours of the disappearance, police identified a local man who had been seen driving the vehicle involved, and his name was Mark Leonard Bridger. At the time, Bridger was a 46-year-old resident of the same small town, someone many locals simply recognised as another familiar face. But beneath that ordinary exterior was a deeply troubling past. Bridger had a long criminal history, stretching back years, including violent offences and disturbing behaviour that painted the pictures of a man who struggled with impulse control, aggression, and disregard for others. When police arrested him shortly after April disappeared, he denied everything, insisting he knew nothing. But the evidence investigators began uncovering told a far darker story. Forensic teams searched Bridger's cottage, and what they found inside transformed the investigation from a missing person case into something far more horrific. Traces of April's blood were discovered within the home. And even more disturbing, investigators found tiny fragments of bone in the fireplace. Experts would later testify that the fragments were consistent with those of a young human skull. Prosecutors argued that after killing April, Bridger attempted to destroy her body in an effort to erase the evidence of what he had done. Despite an enormous search effort involving thousands of volunteers and thousands of officers, April Jones' body was sadly never found. For her family, the loss was compounded by a cruel absence of closure. There would be no place to grieve, no grave to visit, only unanswered questions and unimaginable pain. During his trial, Bridger continued to shift his story. At one point, he claimed he had accidentally run April over with his vehicle and panicked, saying he could not remember what he did with her body. Investigators and prosecutors rejected that explanation, arguing that evidence pointed to something far more deliberate. The jury agreed. After hearing the evidence, they found Mark Bridger guilty of abduction, murder, and perverting the course of justice. The judge handed down the harshest possible sentence available under UK law, a whole life order, meaning Bridger will never be released from prison. He will die behind bars. But understanding crimes like this often leads us to ask a difficult question. What creates someone capable of such a thing? What transforms an ordinary-looking man into the kind of predator who can destroy a child and devastate an entire community? Psychologists often point to something known as adverse childhood experiences. Events such as abuse, neglect, exposure to violence, or chaotic home environments during formative years. Research shows that repeated trauma in childhood can alter brain development, particularly in areas responsible for empathy, impulse control, and moral reasoning. Children raised in unstable or violent environments sometimes grow into adults who struggle to form healthy emotional connections. And in the most extreme of cases, this can contribute to antisocial personality traits, a diminished capacity for empathy, a willingness to manipulate, and a chilling indifference to the suffering of others. Another concept often discussed in cases like this is psychopathy. Psychopathy is not simply anger or cruelty. It is something colder, more calculated. Individuals with strong psychopathic traits tend to appear completely normal to those around them, displaying superficial charm and blending seamlessly into their communities. They laugh with neighbours, hold conversations, and live ordinary lives while feeling little or no genuine empathy for the people around them. This emotional emptiness allows them to commit acts most people cannot even imagine. And that is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of all. The monster isn't always hiding in the shadows. Sometimes he lives just down the street. Neurological research has also revealed possible biological components. Brain imaging studies of individuals with antisocial or psychopathic tendencies often show abnormalities in two key regions. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and impulse control, and the amygdala, which processes fear and emotional responses. When these systems function abnormally, a person may struggle to feel remorse or understand the emotional impact of their actions. Violence becomes easier. Cruelty becomes possible. But psychology and biology may help explain behaviour. They certainly do not excuse it. Nothing can ever excuse the destruction of a child's life. The disappearance on April Jones left a scar not only her family, but on the entire town of Machynlleth. For weeks, neighbours searched side by side through forests and hills, while parents held their children closer, and doors that had once been left unlocked were suddenly bolted shut. The illusion of safety in that small Welsh town had been shattered, because the truth is, one communities everywhere must confront. The greatest threats to innocence rarely comes from strangers lurking in dark alleys. More often than not, they come from people who were already there. People who knew the streets. People who blended into everyday life. People like Mark Bridger. And before we end tonight's episode, I want you to sit with something for a moment. Because stories like this are easy to push away. Easy to file into that distant place we keep for tragedies that feel too dark to think about. We tell ourselves these things happen somewhere else, to someone else, but on that October evening in 2012, in the quiet town of Machynlleth, nothing felt dangerous. Nothing felt unusual. Children were outside playing, and families were living their ordinary lives. 5-year-old April Jones was simply just being a child. The kind of child who still believed the world was safe. The kind who trusted the adults around her. The kind who had absolutely no way of knowing that evil was already nearby. Because the most unsettling truth in this story isn't just what happened, it's who did it. Mark Bridger wasn't a shadow lurking in some distant place. He wasn't a stranger who appeared out of nowhere. He was already there, living among the community, walking the same streets, breathing the same quiet night air as everyone else. That's the thing about monsters in the real world. They rarely look like monsters. They don't always hide in the darkness. Sometimes they laugh with neighbours. Sometimes they will share drinks at the local pub. Sometimes they just stand just close enough to watch innocence until the moment they decide to take it. And somewhere tonight, in a prison cell that will never open again, Mark Bridger continues to breathe, while the little girl whose life he stole does not. There is no grave for April Jones. No quiet place where her family can stand and say goodbye. Only absence. Only silence. Only the unbearable knowledge that somewhere the final truth of what happened to their daughter died inside the mind of the man who took her. And that silence may last forever. So tonight, when you turn off this episode, and the room grows quiet, and the world settles into sleep, remember something. The story of April Jones didn't begin with darkness. It began with an ordinary evening in an ordinary town with a child who should have grown up. And that the most disturbing part of it all is that monsters like this don't belong to horror movies. They belong to the real world. And sometimes they live closer than we ever want to believe. Good night. The echoes of evil linger long after the story's end. In Ellie on Evil, we've dared to confront the darkness that festers within the human heart, peering into the abyss where morality fades and nightmares take hold. But the shadows we've encountered tonight are not confined to the past. They serve as a chilling reminder of the potential for evil that lurks within us all. A constant battle against the darkness that threatens to consume us. As we bid farewell, remember the lessons learned, the horrors witnessed, and the fragile line that separates us from the monsters we fear. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay wary, and never forget the darkness that we have uncovered in Ellie on Evil.